When you think that you've reached the end of this book, you tumble upside down and return to Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland has one of the most peculiar publishing histories in all of literature, and today we're going to trace that story from its very beginnings on a riverbank in Oxford through its publication in the 1860s and up to the newest, boldest, most topsy-turvy edition of the story. This video is sponsored by Jambo Inc. and we'll have more about their incredible work later on in the video. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is one of the most influential children's books ever written in English, but it has an unlikely origin story. To begin with its author, his name was Charles Dodgson, or to give him his full name and title, the Reverend Charles Ludwig Dodgson, and he was a mathematics professor at Christ Church College, Oxford, but he was also a photographer, a poet and a lover of puzzles. In the 1850s he became close friends with Henry Liddell, who had recently moved to Oxford to begin working at Christ Church with his wife and family, and Charles would go on boating trips with them on the river, starting in Oxford and heading out into the Oxfordshire countryside. But one of these trips, exactly 162 years ago, changed the course of English literature. Charles was out with the Liddell girls on a boat, one of whom was called Alice, and he began to tell them a story about a girl called Alice who fell down a rabbit hole and ended up in a topsy-turvy magical world. Like some of the great stories passed down in human history, this began as a story told out loud to a group of people for their own entertainment and not written down to be published. But Alice loved the story with her namesake heroine, and so she begged Dodgson to write it down for her. This wasn't a quick process. Dodgson was a busy mathematician with lots of other side projects on the go, but 2 years later, in November 1864, he presented her with the finished manuscript of the story. This was called Alice's Adventures Underground and was given to her as a Christmas present. The original manuscript still survives today and is in the British Library, and it's an absolutely remarkable object to see. I was lucky enough to see it up close at the British Library last year and was utterly gobsmacked by it. It's dedicated as a Christmas gift to a dear child in memory of a summer's day. And when we turn the page, we can see for the first time in history this first conception of Alice in Wonderland written down. But as we look through the book, we can see it's not entirely Alice as we know her and the story as we know it now. There's no Mad Hatter and no Cheshire Cat. The story is only 4 chapters long and so doesn't have anything that comes later in the story in the version we know today. But what we do see on this very first page and also throughout the book itself is drawings by Dodgson. It's not just a handwritten text. This is something designed to engage with the child's imaginations, and his own drawings are therefore vital. But at this stage, we don't have a book that's going to change the course of children's literature. We just have a manuscript made for a single person to be given to them on a single occasion. But while he was putting this work together, Dodgson did decide to turn the manuscript into a publishable book. And so he rewrote it, expanding the story to make it now almost twice as long as the original version and adding famous scenes like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. I quite like the original illustrations that he included in that manuscript, but he was no professional illustrator. And a story that begins with a grumpy Alice complaining, "What's the use of a book without pictures or conversation?" needed a skilled artist to interpret the text. John Tenniel was the illustrator eventually chosen to carry out this important work, and the result were timeless depictions of characters we now know and love because of these original depictions, whether it's Alice herself or the Mad Hatter or the Queen of Hearts or the White Rabbit or even the Dodo. But there was a problem. When the original 2,000 copies came off the press, Tenniel wasn't happy with the quality of the reproductions, and so Dodgson was forced to recall that whole print run all 2,000 copies and have new sheets printed. This is a hugely interesting moment, and it goes to show how important both of them felt the illustrations were to the story. If the illustrations weren't produced accurately and vibrantly, it wasn't worth publishing the text at all. So they swallowed up the cost and pain of having to reprint the book, and later that year, in November 1865, copies were ready. The book was given the title that we know today, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, obviously a change from that original title of Alice's Adventures Underground, and one that captures the magic and otherworldly nature of Wonderland. But that isn't the only change we see on the title page. The author is given as Lewis Carroll, rather than his real name, Charles Dodgson. Lots of people think that this is the first occasion that Dodgson chose the pen name Lewis Carroll in order to publish Alice, but he'd first used it 9 years earlier when he published a poem called Solitude in a magazine. You see, Dodgson published serious mathematical scholarship as well, and he wanted to keep the works of C.L. Dodgson, those important scholarly publications, separate from those written and published by Lewis Carroll. And he came up with the name by translating his own name, Charles Ludwig, into Latin, Carolus Ludovicus, before translating that back into the English, Lewis Carroll. So it's not just the world of Wonderland that's topsy-turvy and moving to and fro. Everything about its publication is as well. At the end of this process, 4,000 copies were printed and available for sale in time for Christmas 1865, and the book has been a runaway success ever since. We've seen how Carroll's original illustrations became tennials, and then in the years to come, every major illustrator of their day took on Alice, setting her in the Edwardian period and the Roaring Twenties and Jazz Age, all the time reinterpreting her and Carroll's other characters for the times they lived in. And in our own time, we have a brand new edition of Alice in this box. It's published by this video's sponsor, Jambo Ink, and it couldn't be more fitting of the world that inspired it. The book is housed in this beautiful box, which has lots of Alice in Wonderland Easter eggs hidden in its design. We've got on this side here, the playing card with hearts on it. We've got a dodo and a flamingo. And as we turn over, we've got the ears of the White Rabbit and the hat of the Mad Hatter. To the spine, we have the titles in bold red lettering. And if we carefully take this off, I love this feeling, so satisfying, we have one of the cleverest editions of Alice in Wonderland I've ever seen. Because here we don't just have one book, we have two, and they're both bound together in this amazing do-si-do binding. And so here we have the original version of the story, Alice's Adventures Underground, and on the reverse, its published version, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So if we look inside Underground, the original version that Carroll wrote for Alice Liddell, we can start with these beautiful illustrated end papers. This and all the illustrations are in full riotous colour, with 28 on full pages and 16 double page spreads by the artist Zanksi. As we look through, we have the title matter, it's saying it's illustrated by Zanksi, and then an introduction giving us a bit of the publishing history of Alice. And then we get the original text of the story and beautiful illustrations in full page, in vignette, and even across double page spreads. But my favourite thing about this is when we reach the end of the text, we have this amazing sunset illustration with a girl sitting on the riverbank and a boat punting into the distance, with a man telling some children a story. But with this being a do-si-do binding, we reach the end of one book and are invited to begin another. And round on this side, we have Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the published text. And again, this is bold, brave, and vibrant, with another introduction before we get into the text of the story. I think it's worth remembering that when Alice first came out, it would have taken its readers aback. Even though that was a book produced in black ink on white paper. The otherworldly illustrations and the talking animals will have shocked its original readers, and we're having the artist here recreate that for our age with the kind of psychedelic feel to the illustrations and the text, because it's not just the bold colours of the illustrations, but the way the book is designed and typeset. We have these beautiful coloured letters on contrasting coloured paper. And as you can see by the design and the thought that's gone into it and the level of production, this is a collector's edition. One of 1,000 numbered copies sewn and bound into heat-stamped linen covers in the do-si-do binding with embroidered page marker ribbons printed on Swedish Arctic paper in 4 different Pantones. And it also comes with these little bonus treats. These are some Jambo ink playing cards. We have the Mad Hatter here, we have the Ace of Spades, and of course we have the King and Queen of Hearts. It's limited to just 1,000 copies, so if you want to check this out and secure your own copy and go tumbling from one world of Alice's into another, visit the link down below where you can check it out on their website and use the code TOM10 for a 10% discount. And again, a huge thank you to Jambo Ink for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel.